All right, so this is ECON 330, sports economics. So how many of you have had me before get engaged? I'll say I'm noticing quite a few faces. So I teach business statistics a lot, so I get a lot of people in 221, which is one of the prerequisites for this course. We'll kind of start out this week, and I'll kind of go over the syllabus a little bit today, just kind of expectations for the class. And then we'll jump into a little bit of, and I'll go through it relatively quickly, but kind of like a review of some things from 201. And then I don't know if we'll get there Thursday, but if we don't get there Thursday, next week, we'll also do a little bit of review of some linear regression stuff from 221. Okay, so I'm not sure if you didn't have me, they should, I think at the end, you get a little bit of taste of kind of linear regression. So I'll review that a little bit as well before we kind of jump into things in this course. We'll really be trying to kind of marry the two things, which is economics, but as well as kind of bringing some statistics into this course as well. So kind of the overview of the class, I'll kind of work through some things. I'm sitting down, I might get up sometimes and move around, but I'm going to try to, because COVID is a real thing right now. I have like 15 students, I think, who have emailed me who can't make it to classes this week. So I'm going to try to not do as much work on the board and do a lot of work with this dot cam. I also think, as every single class, I'm going to be recording the lectures. It's not going to be perfect. I mean, the audio isn't going to be like as great as you're hearing it in person. Occasionally, I'll be pointing to things or something like that's not going to come up in the recorded video. You're more so getting the audio. You're getting kind of where we were at in the slides at the time, and you will get anything that I'm kind of doing on this dot cam. Okay. I'm not going to do them like live Zooms because I want to create some incentive for you guys to come to class. These aren't supposed to be perfect substitutes, but more so a way that if you do have to miss some time throughout the semester, it's not going to, you're not going to fall behind, right? Also, to be completely honest, I'm not 100% convinced we won't go virtual for a week or two somewhere along the semester, just the way things are going. So I want to be prepared for that. So we're going to be using a book in this class, but honestly, if you bought it, I would suggest returning it. It's a loose, I wouldn't even say it's a loose guideline. We obviously hit a lot of the topics that are in that book, but I definitely do it in a different order. I definitely have a lot of things I'm going to bring into the course that you won't find in the book. I just have to have a book assigned. So that's the one that we have assigned. If you do want it, it's actually, they've got some really interesting examples in there. I even a couple times I'll do some screen grabs from the book because I like the way they do certain things. You can go on, get an old edition. Don't look for the fifth one, look for an older edition, and you can get a used copy for 10, 15, 20 bucks probably, okay? We'll also be doing readings. I say readings, we're really gonna be going through different articles that have been published related to whatever topics. Sometimes it won't even be specific to topics we're talking about, but just more so seeing how we'll apply like what the theory and the statistics we're talking about, how you would apply it to kind of a real world example. So typically we'll do those on Thursdays. I'll always mention kind of, what the article is. I'll post it up on Canvas. And then I don't expect you to go through it with a fine tooth comb, but it makes it a lot more interesting in class and it's a lot more valuable to you if you kind of at least skim through it. And I think this first week on Thursday, I'll kind of show you a paper. We'll kind of walk through it together. I'll kind of show you how I would read the paper, what parts, what sections to kind of look for before we meet on those Thursdays. And kind of at the end of Thursday's class, we'll kind of be going over those different articles. I'll post the lecture slides at the beginning of the week. So before class starts on Tuesday, you'll have that week's lecture slides. So just kind of, you'll see up there on Canvas right now. We go to the files tab. I've got kind of week 1 lectures. I'll probably start labeling these once we start covering specific topics. This first week is just review. You'll notice I put 2 versions, and each week as we progress, I'll create another folder and say like old lecture slides and just start throwing the old ones in there so that the only ones you'll see when you first open the files tab are whatever we're going to be working through that week. So I post a PDF version as well as the PowerPoint version. Sometimes I think it's like Google Chrome's is the one that has the most issue with it. Some of the things I do in PowerPoint for whatever reason do not translate to however that computer is kind of picking up PowerPoint, not through an actual Office program. And so some things will show like no image available on a slide if I I copy and pasted something or I did some formulas, sometimes they won't show up right. So if it's looking kind of wonky when you open the PowerPoint, the PDF is going to be what you'll need to kind of be using. But they're same material in both of them. You'll also got the syllabus up there as well, as you can start looking through, and I'll kind of talk about these project files here in just a minute. So we get the lectures. We're going to have one midterm in this class and then a final. So it won't be comprehensive in the sense that I won't be asking you specific questions going all back to day one. It will be comprehensive in the sense that everything we do is going to build on each other, right? But that first exam, tentative date will be in class on March 3rd. So this is right before spring break. And then kind of after spring break, everything we cover after that will be on the final, which ours is what, Thursday at noon. I put some of the other days that we kind of won't be in class, right? As well as kind of add, drop, and withdrawal dates. Let me see what I was going to do. So this is something I'm apparently not everyone is aware of. So for our final, this is just maybe something that'll be helpful to you. I realized last semester that because some of you started in the semester that was, the first COVID year, you didn't have a lot of in-class stuff. Final exams a lot were online. But if we're doing in-class finals, if you just Ball State final exam schedule. I don't have the exact link, and then you click the very first one, go down here. This is how finals are decided, right? So we have an assigned time slot because all of you have different classes. So to make sure that there's no crossover, this is how the university has done it. So you kind of notice if you have other classes and you're kind of curious, I don't know, they should be putting the final exam date in the syllabus or whatever. But you can kind of say, okay, we're meeting at 2. So 3 credit hour course at 2 on Tuesday, Thursday. The exam would be Thursday at noon. Okay? So just something that I wasn't aware that some of you weren't aware of until last semester when someone asked me, how did I come up with that time? It's all based off of kind of what the university guidelines are. Okay. Any questions up to this point? Probably not. So what do you care about? Kind of grades? How are you going to get the grade, or how are you going to pass the course? 40% of the course is going to come from exams. Right? So it's a little bit lower than 50%, but still a pretty sizable chunk. So each exam is going to be worth 20%. Right? The midterm and the final will both be worth 20%. Homeworks, right? We should have about 6, maybe 7 of these. Well, I shouldn't say that. It could be AI. I like to keep things fluid. And so depending on where the direction the class goes, sometimes I'll separate 2 homeworks up to make them a little bit shorter and a little bit easier. Sometimes I'll make them a little bit longer. So I would say expect around 6 to 7 kind of homeworks. And that I'll be pretty tough, I would say, in the grading. Maybe a little bit tougher on the homeworks even than the exam, because you have a lot of time. When I assign these, they'll typically be at 2 to 3 weeks before they're due. And that's because I want to get them out there early so that as we kind of work through material, you can kind of chip away at that homework, right? You start to say, okay, I recognize this problem was what we were talking about this week. I can work on that. And you're not kind of waiting till the very end and trying to go back 3 weeks to remember what we did in class, right? Now, even though I'll grade them, like I said, I'll be pretty stringent. I'm also a resource for these. So anytime you have questions on these, I expect you reach out to me, come to my office hours. Like, I don't want you to not get points on these. It's just that, it is a pretty good chunk of the grade. And because you have a long time to work on them, probably a little bit more stringent on the grading on those than the exams, right? Oops. Out of order here, so I guess I'll mention both of these at the same time. So we're going to do online quizzes. So I say every day here. Sometimes we might not do some, but more often than not, after class every day, a quiz will then pop up on Canvas that you can go into, and it'll have typically 2, 3, 4 questions, usually related to what we covered in class that day, or potentially kind of the reading. And when I say the reading, like, it'll be very easy questions if it comes to that, like just to make sure that you actually looked at it, like asking you about what the topic of it was, right? Something like that. So to get those questions right, it's going to be very helpful and useful to be in class. Sometimes I'll even put a question on there that looks exactly like what we did in class, right? So this is kind of another mechanism I'm trying to use to encourage you to show up, right? So how these will be scored, like let's say there was 3 questions on one. Just for submitting it, you would get 7 out of 10. And then for each question you get correct, you get an additional point, right? So this is really meant to be an area where everyone should be getting like above 90% of these, right? Because sometimes I'll be asking you pretty easy questions. Sometimes I'll only ask one question. So just submitting it, you get the 9 out of 10 base points. So usually the average of these should be somewhere around like an 85 to a 90, right? These are supposed to be meant to help you kind of improve your grade. Okay? And it's also a way for you to kind of see some problems, like start to get familiar with problems that you might see on the exam, start topics that you see pop up in the homeworks. And I always say, anything you do in life is like, as well as your grade in this class, is always a combination of 2 things: your skill level and your effort level, right? It doesn't matter if you have like all the skill in the world. If you just sit around and don't do anything, you're not going to be very productive, right? So same thing with this grade. Part of your grade will be an effort component. This is the biggest effort component. Just get on and submit them, right? And as long as you get on and submit them, this should be a category where you get a really, really high % of the points, okay? I'll drop the 2 lowest at the end of the semester. So if you miss one somewhere along the line, for whatever reason that just slipped your mind, or you don't do too hot on a couple of them, I'll drop those 2 lowest at the end of the semester as well. Oh, one more thing I do want to mention. So I think I said here by the end of the day, I'm actually gonna switch that up. So we meet a little bit later in the day, so that's not really fair if you have another class after this or something, or if you go to a job. So basically, once I assign these after class, once they pop up, you'll have until we start class the next time to submit them, right? So if I give you one on a Thursday, you've got the whole weekend, right? I've got until that following Thursday. I originally was thinking the end of the day, and then I don't know why I was not thinking. I did this for other classes as well, and they're all very early in the morning, so I wasn't thinking about that for you guys. But we're also going to have like a course-long project. So notice this is worth just as much as each of the exams, right? So it's 20% of your overall grade. As long as you put effort into this, I think a lot of people do very well and get a very good grade on these projects. They're meant to be interesting. They're specific to each one of you. So, it'll be kind of hard early on to work on this in the course until we see some more examples and kind of start to be able to think about some things you could do for this project. But probably after the first 3-4 weeks or so, you should start to be coming up with an idea. You should start to, put a little bit of time and work into it. That way you're not kind of doing it all like in the last week or 2, right? Because I'm not going to be able to help you as much if that's what you wait to do, okay? Let me see, I'm going to skip ahead here. So I've got kind of a loose outline of what the project is going to be like. This will make a lot more sense as we start to see more of these articles every Thursday, right? That's why I said that probably after 3 or 4 weeks, you'll start to get an idea about what this project is going to look like. But for now, I'll just kind of mention it. It is going to be something that you have to complete by the end of the semester. It should be pretty substantial. Part of it is going to be, there will be a data component to it. Not only a data component, but for 90% of the projects, you should be able to do some type of linear regression. Usually I have like 10% that go kind of a different way. Maybe we don't have enough data to like do some regression, but you have enough data to like come up and compare some, means or means by different groups or changes over time. So for some of you might not have a linear regression component, but you should have some type of data analysis component. Okay? And that'll be, like I said, specific to every single kind of person's topic. So what I want you to do is by February 11th I'll have created something up on Canvas that is a submission proposal for your project. Okay. So this will be kind of a very like 1 paragraph, 2 paragraphs of just what topic you're interested in, what question you're going to try to answer with your project, or what kind of analysis that you're going to do in terms of, like I said, generally like the question you have and maybe kind of an idea about what data you would need, right? So at this point, I now know kind of what you're interested in. I know or what your topic is. I can start to think about what data sources will be useful for you, and I can start to help you collect data. I don't expect you, that's the part of the project I don't expect you to do. I don't expect you to do the data collection. I have too many files on my computer of just random and sports data. I've got powerlifting meet data. I've got, I've got play-by-play for NFL and basketball and college basketball now. I have some old Formula One. Another student did a project on Formula One racing. So nothing is off limits. right? I would say, and I think I have here, the earliest, I'll go to more about the topics here or the things you can think about that you could choose in just a second, but I want to finish this up. So we'll have that proposal submission on the 11th. I'll start to kind of get data out to people. You can start working on it. If you want to submit it about a month before the semester ends, so I've got April 1st here, basically in a week, those of you submit it early, I'll kind of go through them, give you some, add this, edit this, you need to do, this differently. And then you'll have kind of another 3 weeks to kind of make those changes and then submit it on April 22nd, or I guess 2 weeks until you submit it till April 22nd. And I made this a little bit earlier than when the semester ends so that we don't have like you studying for the final, but also working on the project. Like that seems a little bit much. Okay. And, if you have an idea prior to February 11th and you already know what you want, you can let me know and I can start collecting the data early, right? I can start getting things to you early and you could work on this. You could have this project done well before the end of the semester, right? But I think it will probably take a couple of weeks and to really get a good idea about what you want to do and kind of maybe the data that would be out there. Yeah, so I will get a link up there probably at the end of this week and it'll just be sitting out there, but the due date won't be until February 11th. But if at any time, you've got your idea, you can submit it there. Now, one thing I would suggest strongly is if you run your idea by me first, maybe, because if you've got it early, it helps me out. So don't have to get data for everyone all at the same time. I can kind of space it out a little bit. So if you know early, let me know. I can start to go out and help you with the data collection. Second question. No, I generally don't offer like any extra credit assignments. Occasionally, maybe if actually, I don't know if I've ever done it for this class. I've done it in some of my stats courses, but if a, exam grade gets a little bit low, I sometimes will potentially offer an opportunity to earn some of the points back, but that I wouldn't expect that. I don't think I've ever done it for Econ 330, but maybe. Right. Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, no group projects. Right? I probably shouldn't bad talk them, but I hate group projects. So yeah, it'll be each one of you specific chooses your own topic. Make sure I don't have anything else here before yeah, so I've got a couple ideas here. Well, I'll go through them in time so I don't overwhelm you. So just a couple ideas of like what these projects could look like. And I have a file up on Canvas, and I'll show you where it's at in a second, that has like 20 ideas, I think, on there, and kind of a little short description. These are a little bit longer of descriptions because it was actual projects that someone did. So superstar power, there's been a lot of different variations of this that I've had students do. But basically, you can kind of look at thinking about some of these major sports players. It could be in any NBA, NFL, anything. Is having them in the city, does it have economic impacts on that city, right? So when LeBron goes back to Cleveland, the local restaurants, the local businesses start to see kind of an increase in their sales because of an increased like foot traffic, right? More people going to the games. You could do this really in any sport. And I've had people look at it in a bunch of different dimensions. So maybe it's not just like a really good player, like stats wise, but maybe they have really high jersey sales. They're really popular, right? It's a really good measure of like who a superstar is, who has the highest jersey sales, even after they're already in the league for a few years, right? That could be a good indicator. Or maybe look at all-star voting, right? And fan all-star voting, it kind of shows you who the fans like the most. So that might be a good measure. Or your project would say like, let's do all of these, right? Let's see, how does a player's jersey sales impact, right, the unemployment rate in their city? How does their all-star voting for that player impact the unemployment rate in that city? And this is, if you have an idea and you have a specific league or sport in mind, this is where it's going to be like, I kind of want to do this, but I'm not exactly sure how, like exactly what I need to do or how I need to do this. So coming to me, stopping by office hours, probably in 5 to 10 minutes, we can kind of spitball like, well, what if we do this? Would this be something that you'd be interested in, or kind of what you're thinking, like along the lines of what you're thinking? And then I can go out and get the data for you and kind of progress from there. I had someone do this is one of my favorite ones because I would have never ever thought of it. But someone did this thing where they looked at WWE or I don't even know if it's called WWE anymore. That was probably what it was when I was a kid, but and the UFC, are they rivals? Are they complements, or are they substitutes, right? Are they splitting demand, or is like all, rising tides and, or what is it? Rising tides from all boats, whatever. But so substitutes are complements, right? So I think what he actually did is he went out and we kind of found some of these viewer ratings on the weekends when UFC and WWE had events at the same time. And then we also had weekends where only one of them had an event. And we can kind of look at the difference between kind of what those ratings were to see, like, when they're both in the same weekend, do we tend to see that the ratings are higher, or when we only have one of them, do the ratings tend to be lower? All right, so that was, I don't know, just one I never would have thought about. Have any of you had game theory? A couple of you. You can take more of a game theoretical approach, right? So this was one project was kind of like that, which was the idea of, in baseball, right, you typically have kind of a 5-pitcher rotation. And I also will try, when I give examples, I'll try to act like whatever sport I'm talking about, you might have no idea about it, because you might not. You might just be in this class because you're interested in it and you have no idea about, like, for instance, I don't know that much about the actual play of hockey. I'm just not a fan of it, but it doesn't matter. We kind of dive into what the rules are, or dive into specific situations. We can use microeconomic principles to understand it. So this one was, if each team's got 5 pitchers, you would think, like, okay, we both would want to pitch our best pitcher versus the other best pitcher. But in the playoffs or something, well, what if I could put my worst pitcher against their best? I'm going to lose that game. That's fine. But now in every other game, I can put my best pitcher against their second best and my second best against their third. So now I have an advantage in every other game. And sometimes this is kind of forced because a team has to do like a playing game or something like that. They have to waste that first pitch, right? So there's different ways of getting at, like, what kind of matchup is ideal? What matchup would be kind of optimal for me to win the highest number of games, right? And it may not simply be putting my best pitcher up against their best, my second best up against their second best. So he kind of did this and kind of, looked at through Major League season, right? When a team was, if I can move this, forced to start like their second best pitcher against the other team's best, did that tend to lead to more favorable outcomes, right? So there's, you can go a bunch of different directions with this project. Like I said, on Canvas, I've got this project files. So I think the example project, was that ACE versus ACE one. Yeah, so this was like probably what I would say is like a really, this is 100 out of 100 project, right? So this is why I gave it to you as the example project, right? You'll kind of notice it's what, 10 pages, about 9-10 pages. But as long as like the data analysis is done really well, right? It doesn't have to be the longest thing in the world, right? I think the data analysis component is really going to be kind of the most important kind of section of this. But, just as you're starting to work on it, take a look through this one, you'll kind of see this is really like 100% a kind of example project. And they also put up what the components are, a little bit more kind of length of explanation. And we'll start to review these throughout the semester as we get kind of closer and closer to that early submission date. And it'll make a little bit more sense once we start to look at some of those academic papers every Thursday. And then here's the list of project ideas. So here's like 20 different ideas. High tides rise all ship. I guess that was the saying that I was escaping me earlier for some reason. So this is a good starting point, but really nothing's off limits. In fact, this is sports economics. But one thing I'll mention and kind of bring up some ideas along the way is really probably a better name I've seen out there is like leisure economics, in the sense that a lot of what we're doing can actually be applied to anything that someone does for enjoyment, right? Anything that someone is going to attend, like this would be a concert. A lot of what we'll be talking about, like with ticket prices and things for different teams, the same thing could be applied to musicians, right? And them selling tickets to a concert. I've seen some models, some things we do, you could actually use in like art museums. So like an art museum has like multiple different players or artists or something like that, right? So it's really anything that people would attend in their leisure time, right? But 90% of the examples I'll give you will probably be sport, right? And there probably are more examples and more applications in our more kind of conventional sports than there would be in these other kind of leisure activities. Any other questions on the project or kind of anything related to the course up to this point? Okay.
In theory, could you do a project about entertainers, or is that the sticking point?
So to choose a specific entertainer would be difficult. So that the one thing I will say is there's a lot more data out there on sports than there would be like musicians or performers and things like that, because they're like they're solo like a solo entity, and they have all their data, and like they have no reason to ever put it out there, right? There's no incentive for them, so it's a lot harder to get that. I think I had someone once, and it was just took a lot longer, where they went out on, I forget, it was like StubHub or something, and you can like go back in time, and they just did a bunch of data entry about ticket prices over like a certain time period, and I forget what they were looking at, how something else impacted those prices, like some events that were occurring over that time period, but it made it a lot more work for them to get the data. Well, I helped them, but yeah. Any other questions? Okay. So I had this up here. If I can get there. There you go. So today, when I get back to my office, I'll put up that first online quiz, and it's basically going to be kind of like a couple short questions. These are general, kind of these general 4 questions. There's no right or wrong answer, so it's really just get on and submit it for this first one. You all get 10 out of 10. Like everyone should get 10 out of 10 on this first one. And it'll be due before we start class on Thursday. That way, after Thursday's class, I can sit down, look at the data, and kind of see, like, get an idea about what everybody's major is, kind of where you're at in terms of your classification at the university. I'll put up some options for math courses. So just to get a better idea of like the demographics of like, so I can, I don't know, cater my teaching a little bit more towards whatever that is going to be. I'll probably also leave an open-ended question on there, which is just, why did you take the course? It just gives me an idea about what, if you had interest, if it was the only elective that filled the time slot you had available, right? It gives me a general idea about what direction to take the course. If you took it because you have interest in certain things, feel free to leave that there. That way I can kind of think about, okay, maybe I'll start using, if I see that everybody in here, is really interested in a specific sport, maybe I'll start using more of those examples throughout the semester. Okay. All right, so kind of just some general things I always tell every class, right? So how can you pass? How can you get a good grade? I can't stress this enough. I'm not using any incentives really, other than that you get a better experience of the lecture. But like, I'm not using eye clickers, right? I'm not giving you points for attendance, right? However, I can't stress enough, the people who physically attend class the most are the ones that tend to also do the best in the class, right? So over the last like 2 years, right, I've actually gathered a lot of this data, and I've used some eye clickers here and there. And I've actually, a lot of times in review sessions, I'll grab things like whoever attended. And I've looked at correlations with attendance and then grades, and it is a strong positive correlation, right? So showing up, come to class, pay attention, do the homework. Even if you're not sure on things, you stay to the last minute, you can't get every question done, a 50 is a hell of a lot better than a 0, right? A 0 really hurts your grade, okay? 50 is not good, right? But you can come back from it, right? It's not going to tank your grade, right? And those homeworks are 30% of your overall grade, so a 0 in there really starts to make a big deal, okay? So make sure you're going to come into class paying attention, do the homework, get even if you can't get all of it done, get as many points as possible there. Ask me for help. Those homeworks, you got a long period of time to work on them. Stop by my office hours. So Monday, Wednesday, 2 to 4. And then after this class, oh, no, this shouldn't say 2 to 3. This is when we're meeting. This is when my office hours were last year. So it should be 3:30 to 4:30. So it's going to be the kind of, and really 3:15 to 4:30, but it takes me a little bit of time to get back to my office maybe and kind of grab a drink of water or something. So after class, kind of that next hour and 15 minutes, I'll be my office hours as well. So I can guarantee I'll be in my office in these hours. If for whatever reason the door is closed because I lost track of time on one of those days, well, for us, not really Tuesday, Thursday, but Monday, Wednesday, it's because I lost track of time. And honestly, I don't want to put my mask on my office, and I get tired of people stopping by and I have to put my mask on. So the door's shut, just knock. I'll be there during these time slots. If they don't work for you, send me an email. We can find another time that works. I'm around Monday, Wednesdays all afternoon. I teach Monday, Wednesday mornings. But then Tuesday, Thursdays, I'm around all morning, and I'm kind of up to this class as well. So those times don't work for you, want to meet another time, shoot me an email. We can find a time that works. Okay. I expect you to ask me questions on those homeworks. I expect you to come by, start to spitball a project idea. I expect, I usually in this class, I get a handful of people who will stop by and just want to talk about some sport issue they're interested in. So I enjoy that. So always feel free to kind of reach out there. Okay. And I will have a GA for this course. I'll repost the syllabus at the end of the week. They're giving me their office hours by the end of the week, so you can see that in the syllabus once I re-upload that, probably on Friday. I'm hoping they get them to me early in the day Friday. All right, so we'll kind of start diving just what this course is going to be a little more about. So I think of sports economics, like there's a couple different areas, right? And we'll touch on all of them. But the first one would be, I think, what everyone's mind goes to, which is like sport performance, right? So this is things like, how do playing in different time zones affect player performance? How is start time of games? How does that impact, the performance of a team? How would playing back-to-back games influence a player's points per game or something like that? So these are all performance, like the team or the player's performance, right? I think that's where a lot of people's minds go to, and that's great. Those are all very interesting. We'll cover a lot of them. A lot of you will probably want to look at a project that kind of dives into one of these performance types of questions. I've seen some other ones, like anytime we have changes in the rules to a game, how does that impact kind of the different metrics of player performance? We then kind of have more firm or kind of player specific in terms of things like how is, and so we'll go over this article on Thursday, if colleges start allowing beer to be sold at the stadium, how does that impact attendance or the price of tickets? We'll start to talk about things like profit versus win maximization. Teams obviously want to win as many games as possible, but that comes at a cost. And so if I just increase my cost, eventually I've eaten into all of my profits. So how much do I win maximize? How much do I profit maximize? Then the player kind of aspect of it is, well, maybe it's not necessarily even kind of performance, but we're thinking about, we can use performance to get measures of different things. So maybe we look at in the contract year, when a player's contract is going to be up, they have to sign a new contract, maybe they're putting more effort in, right? Or maybe they're, a little bit more intentional about their practice and things like that. And so maybe we see an increase in the effort of the player, which is then reflected in their performance. We're not necessarily concerned as much about their performance. We're just using that as a measure of something else, right? So those two are great. We'll go over a lot of those. But the third one is the one that I find the most interesting, which is just using sports data to get at a general theory question, like a general economic question. So for instance, there's a paper we'll look at one point in the semester that talks about the superstar effect, which is if golfers are going up against, I think that the paper specifically looks at Tiger Woods back in his prime, right? Did those golfers do better? Did they do worse, right? Was there some type of, defeatism where if I'm going, like, if I go to, right, if I was going to play a game of Bachelor 21 with, who's someone like, choose your NBA player, right? I would get destroyed. I wouldn't even want to get on the court, right? I'd probably put in very little effort because I know I'm going to lose, right? But maybe if I'm going up against someone that's, a little bit, maybe they play at like a college, D3 school or something like that. Maybe I'll try. I'm probably still going to lose, but at least I'm going to put in a little bit more effort, right? So there's kind of this game theoretical, this optimal effort choice thing going on, and we can use sports data to get at that, right? One thing that we'll dive into towards the end of the semester is more discrimination issues. And a good example for this would be something like, maybe we're just concerned with, is there discrimination existing in the US right now? And what we could do is look at TV viewership when we have maybe white versus black quarterback on the team playing, right? There's people who've done this, right? And then from that, you can see, well, if viewership is lower when we see someone from whatever minority group we want to choose playing, is there discrimination against that group, right? Or maybe we could also do some gender things here. If there's discrimination with gender, using TV viewership or something like that as well, or attendance to games. Sunk cost fallacies, we can kind of see, like, once something's spent, you shouldn't be making a decision like it's a sunk cost, right? I have to pay that either way. So one thing we could use sports data to get at this is thinking about issues like, these teams that sign a player to a huge contract, if it's guaranteed money and the player is playing terrible, but they're like, well, we spent all this money, right? We've got, we have to play them. We have to stick with them. Well, no, that money is spent whether or not you keep playing that player or you cut them, right? And so you shouldn't be factoring that into your decision. And we see that a lot of teams do. If they spend high draft picks, if they sign huge contracts, they're way less likely, given the same level of performance, to cut that player or to bench that player. Right? So we can use sports data to really get at questions that, really go across different fields, not just sports. We could think about how it applies to, sunk cost to corporations and things like that as well. Okay, so I guess a little bit of me kind of here, I'm trying to maybe give you some, a little bit of data as to why we should care, right? So, why is having a good understanding? We'll also do a little bit of like kind of more industrial organization type stuff in this course as well. Like, teams are competing for fans. So like we've got multiple firms kind of competing for the same consumers. But why should we care, right? Well, first of all, there is a lot of money in these. Like if this was any other industry, we would also be very interested in it, right? Because there's so much money involved. So I went out and grabbed a couple numbers, what I could find. So I think last year, advertising, I guess it's been 2 years ago, advertising for the Super Bowl was $382 million, right? So some of the things we'll talk about in this class as well is kind of some advertising that's used in sport, or use advertising as a measure of kind of different team decision making. What was it? The college playoffs. So I went back to 2018. It was 26.9 and 28.4 million people kind of viewing the college playoff games. I actually was going to use last night's, and then I looked it up, and this has been like, I guess it was the lowest that it's literally ever been since they introduced the college playoff. But even last year, it was still, pretty high. Took a pretty, for whatever reason, took a drop this year. But these are still, even whatever, I think, I forget what the number was now because I was just looking at it, but it's still very, very high, right? If we think about just your general kind of consumer, how much money is being spent, it's really hard to get a good measure of that, right? Because people buy apparel, they attend games, right? There's a bunch of different ways that you can spend money on whatever your favorite sports team is. And in fact, if we look at Forbes valuations, so you can go and look at Forbes valuations of a lot of different companies. They also do valuations and they treat the leagues as companies because they really are, right? So the valuations, I mean, we're 13 billion NFL, Major League Baseball, 10 billion, and we'll really probably focus on these 5 leagues. Like we'll look at some other, issues related to college, and we'll look at some other smaller leagues occasionally, maybe like the PGA, things like that. But most of what I'll show you will be these main 5 leagues. That's just because they have the highest valuations, right? Yeah. So I actually had some old ones and I was updating. So 2020. Yeah, we've had basically 1 year since then. So this was post-COVID. So if you look at pre-COVID, it was trending. So it was trending up, took a little dip, and then, so these aren't like how much money they made. This is just the valuation of the league. So this is Forbes like projecting out. So Forbes was probably not factoring in that little dip. They probably were still using that upward trajectory. And I know that from looking at the old numbers, the largest increase, which I'm guessing had to do with they were able to increase demand a lot or draw in a lot more people because they were the league that had the most play during COVID. The NBA went from like high 4 billions to 7.4 billion after, kind of after that COVID thing. So I'm guessing the bubble played a role there, which could be an interesting project idea. Like there's data out there on player performance. There's data out there on different team valuations. You kind of see like, how did the playing over the bubble impact different teams, right? There's also some interesting things you can do. Someone did it last year because we had just enough data where you can look at like the impact of attendance, because now you have examples of games where there's no fans, but you also have other data where there was similar players, similar teams, like playing when they did actually have fans? So there's some interesting questions there as well. Yeah. Actually, I think the one that I left off here as well, just kind of interesting. It was actually higher than both the Premier League and NHL was India's cricket league as actually like at 6 point something billion. Like, it is an insane. I know nothing about cricket other than that, like they use that goofy looking like bat thing. But also watched the movie where they got old cricket players to play baseball. I forget what movie that was, but it was interesting. But yeah, these are huge corporations. I mean, billions of dollars valuation, right? So, you know, hopefully, even if you're not interested in sports, you know, I don't know how you end up in the class, but that's okay. Right, we're going to be talking about a lot of different issues that could be applied to really any company, right? And when we talk about players, we can think about them really, they're like any worker at any other company as well, right? So we have to have kind of a general understanding of economics before we start to like apply it to sport specific examples. So we'll start doing kind of for the end of the class today, and we might get out a little bit early, but I want to do a little bit of review of kind of some 201 stuff. We'll kind of start doing some 201 review. Okay. So, you know, a market is anything where we have buyers and sellers of a product. We will not only in this class be looking at, you know, just a general product market, which is, you know, maybe apparel or concession for food, you know, beer sales at different sporting events, but also a lot at the labor market, right? Where the product is now kind of, you think about our consumers and our producers would be the consumers of labor would be the teams, and the producers of labor, the ones supplying the labor, are actually the players, right? So we'll be looking a lot at the labor market in this class as well. We'll kind of start out thinking about just a general product market. Maybe this is like for the apparel of a team, okay? So a competitive market is going to be one which will start out assuming that we have, which is that no one person has any influence over the price. After we get that basic down, we'll start to look at, well, actually these teams have a lot of power. The players union has a lot of power. We actually don't often see a competitive market when we're looking at sporting examples. Sometimes we do, right? But more generally, it's very, you know, we run into a lot of issues. But we'll start out with a competitive market where nobody, no one buyer, no one seller has any power over the price of whatever that good is in the market. Okay? So what we'll say here is that everybody's a price taker, right? Whatever the price of a product falls to, and we typically call this the equilibrium price, right? That's what they're going to have to pay, or that's what they're going to have to sell the product for. You know, think about demand. The law of demand is that as the price of something goes up, people are going to buy what? Less of it, right? Generally, okay? There's some weird, goofy examples we could get into where like luxury goods, where the price actually makes it a highly desirable like brand or something like that. But, you know, for the sake of kind of starting out here, as the price of a good goes up, people buy less of it, and vice versa. Okay? So we have this relationship between the price of a product and quantity demand. Okay? Get down here. Oh, I did not have the equation. I still don't have that to the next slide. So what we'll say is that we're going to keep this demand always linear in this class. So that what that looks like is something like this. Is that thought? Oh, I changed. Should be able to. It's because I have it on me. Maybe. There we go. So we could do something like this, right? So we're always going to keep demand linear. So we're going to have price is a function of the quantity demand. Right? So keeping it linear means that as the quantity, right, if I think about how much is going to be sold, the price is cute. Sorry, actually, what's going to have to be true about B here? If I'm thinking about the relationship between price and quantity, right? Where you could think of this as just a general linear equation like we have in math. So I think in math, it's what Y is equal to mx plus b, but we can write it in the order so that kind of looks similar here. Rx is quantity, Ry is P, or price and quantity. Okay? So what has to be true about B if, as the price of something goes up, people want to buy less of it? So that's going to look something like this. So as the price goes up, people buy lower quantities, right? The price is right here. People are going to purchase much less than if the price is lower, produce much, or they're going to want to purchase a lot more. Okay. So what has to be true if this is my demand curve? What has to be true about the sign of B? Yeah, all right. It's gonna be less than zero. It's gonna be negative. So we have this downward sloping or this kind of inverse relationship between price and quantity, downward sloping demand curve. And one thing that's nice, and I don't know who you took 201 with, and if they really kind of try to sell this, but one thing that I think makes a lot of what we're gonna do a lot easier to understand is I like to think about the demand curve really. Every time I put like D for the demand curve, it also represents the marginal benefit to the consumer, right? Because think about it this way. We're looking at this first unit, right? What the demand curve is telling us is that if the price was, I don't know, let's say 20 for this product, that this consumer would purchase exactly 1 unit, right? So what that must mean is that when that consumer looks at the value to them of that first unit, their marginal benefit, how much they're going to benefit from purchasing this good, must be greater than or equal to the price, right? So what the demand curve is telling us is that for that first unit, they would be willing to pay $20 or anything less, right? So they'll pay up to the point where their marginal benefit is exactly equal to that price. So the demand curve is telling me that at each one of these quantities, if I go over to the price, you know, if I use that demand curve to then go over and look at what price I would have to set for them to buy that quantity, that's telling me that that's exactly how much that consumer benefits, because this is the highest price they would pay. And the highest price they would pay is right up to the point where that price is equal to the marginal benefit of purchasing that good. Okay. So this is the general idea that why is demand falling? Well, right, I always use a non-sports example. I always say, you know, when I get done mowing the lawn, I would pay like $15 for like an ice cold beer, right? But then if you say, okay, what about another one? Well, okay, that's still going to be good, but like my thirst is quenched, like I'm cooling down. Maybe I'll give you, $7 or $8. Well, what about a third one? Well, at this point, like I have things to do during the day. Like I can't sit here and drink. Like I'm valuing each one of these less and less, right? And so the other one I always give is like, think of the marginal benefit of having a car, right? Like the marginal benefits to your everyday life are huge. That's why cars are relatively expensive, right? Even for like a beater, right? People pay a couple $1,000s. Okay? Now, if I already have a car, what's the value? And let's assume most of you probably, I don't know, maybe some of you are married, have a family, but I'm guessing most of you don't, right? What is the benefit to you of having a second car? Not near as much as that first one, right? Like I only drive one car at a time. I mean, I guess if I have like unlimited resources, I might have some, fairly high benefit to owning, unique cars or things like that. But the marginal benefit of that second car is much lower. So as I purchase more of, or as I'm thinking about purchasing more and more of a good, the price I'm going to be willing to pay starts to go lower and lower. Okay. So thinking of the demand curve as the marginal benefit curve as well, I think is another really good way of thinking about this. So, all right, kind of think I've already said, yeah, that's basically the idea of diminishing marginal benefit, right? As I purchase more of a good, the marginal benefit or the price that I'd be willing to pay falls. Okay. Like I said, this should be kind of review. And I think I've got, hopefully this switches back. It's taking a while. I don't know, shouldn't be taking this long. There we go. So that's the idea of diminishing marginal benefit, or that's why the demand curve is downward sloping. Okay. There we go. So I already kind of jumped ahead a little bit. We've got our demand equation. We know B is going to be negative. We can think about A is going to be where our intercept is, right? So if I go back to my drawing here, it's a little small, but you can kind of think about wherever my demand curve intersects the y-axis, that's where my intercept is, or that's A, right? And then the slope, right, of this line is going to be that value for B. And we know it's going to be negative. Right? All right. So supply is going to work basically the exact opposite, right? If I'm selling something, if the price of what I'm selling goes up, I'm going to want to sell more of them, right? And generally with supply, we think of it as reflecting not the marginal benefit, right, but the marginal cost to those sellers or those producers. Okay? So if I think about my supply curve, right, our supply curve is reflecting the producer's marginal cost. Because what the supply curve is telling me is that, okay, for this first unit, a firm will be willing to supply it if they can get $10 for it. Why? Because for the firm, just like the consumer only purchased it if the marginal benefit to them was greater than or equal to the price that it cost them. Well, what's that really saying? What's saying if the marginal benefit is greater than the marginal cost to the consumer? The cost of the consumer is the price. For the producer, the person selling the good, the marginal benefit is the price. So as long as the price they can get is greater than or equal to their marginal cost, how much it costs them to produce the good, then they're willing to supply it to the market, right? So it's really the same principle that's going on both directions. As long as the marginal benefit is greater than the marginal cost or greater than or equal to, then the consumer purchases the good or the producer provides the good, right? It's just that price is a cost to consumers, but a benefit to our producers, okay? So the supply curve is going to reflect kind of, at each quantity, the price that would have to be, the price that the producer would have to be able to get in order to then produce that. And we think of there's going to be increasing marginal costs. And I won't dive too much into, everything behind that, but really what's driving that is mainly like labor costs. So if we think about, if I'm producing a good, we can try to think of something where it's like, there's no raw materials, right? There's no like, price of lumber doesn't influence it. So some type of like a service industry where you're like, maybe it's just providing like daycare workers or something, like where the only input into your product is literally your workers, right? So what's going to happen is you're going to hire the best worker first, right? They're going to be able to produce the most products. They're going to be able to, they have the highest efficiency. And so you're getting a lot of units for the cost of one worker. Well, now you hire the next best worker. They're not quite as efficient, but this is like a competitive labor market. You have to pay them the same wage, right? They're doing the same job. You're paying them the same wage, but they're less efficient. And so they're going to be able to produce less, right? So as that process continues, to produce more, it's going to start to, I'm going to start have to using really, really bad workers. And now instead of hiring just one worker to get one more unit, maybe now I need to hire like 4 or 5, right? And so that's going to be kind of the main reason that's driving our marginal cost to be increased, or our marginal cost to increase. Okay? Like I said, we don't have to have a great understanding of that. For now, we can kind of just take it as we know that there's going to be this positive relationship between price and quantity supplied, that it reflects that we have these increasing marginal costs, and these increasing marginal costs really are going to be coming from the fact that labor is less and less efficient as we hire more and more workers. Okay. So we've got supply and demand, right? We kind of already think about, we've got a demand equation. We also have a supply equation. We can really represent the same way. It's just now we know that B is going to be positive for the supply curve, right? Because it's upward sloping, right? A is still going to be our intercept value. And now we have kind of this slope being B, but it's going to be positive. Is this sounding familiar? Hopefully, one of the questions on that quiz might be how many econ courses have you taken at this point, just so I get a kind of a good idea. I don't want to waste too much time on this. I know if you're like a senior right now, you're probably, I've done this in like a bunch of other electives already, but I want to kind of make sure that we're all getting a little bit of a refresher if it's been a while. So we're also then going to start to think about, all right, we've got supply, we've got demand. What are some things that are going to shift supply and demand? So supply and demand is telling me the relationship between price and quantity demanded and price and quantity supplied. Okay, it's reflecting the relationship, but there's a lot of other things that influence how much of a good is purchased other than just the price, right? because other things can influence the value of that good to the consumer, or potentially change the costs of providing that good to the seller. So what are some things that are going to shift demand? So I put like a kind of a reminder. Anytime I see a demand increase, that's going to mean that at the same price, I can sell more of the good, right? So our demand increases, that's kind of shifting out to the right, right? Demand decreases is going to be at the same price. It's going to be a factor that has changed such that people buy less of the good. So it's going to be kind of this shift to the left, or I always kind of explain it as, right, think about if this line kept shifting, it's going to be getting closer and closer to the 0 point, right? Demand decreasing, it's getting closer to that 0 point. Demand increase, it's getting further away, okay? So what are some things that are going to shift demand, right? And we kind of think about maybe some sport specific examples here. So the number of buyers, right? So this is why there's such a concern, and we'll start to dive into this very early in the course, of small and large market teams. So all a small large market team means is that large market teams, there's just more people and more money in the area, in the city that the team is located in, right? So the number of buyers is going to increase demand, right? So if I'm thinking about like New York compared to Indianapolis, New York's demand curve is much, much higher when it comes to apparel and things like that, right? As opposed to Indianapolis, right? They just have fewer people, okay? So, fewer people in Indianapolis would have kind of a lower demand curve, right? Kind of demand curve closer to that 0 point, right? So yeah, we'll use this a lot. A city's population is like a good measure of that. Sometimes we like to do a little bit, push a little further. So maybe kind of thought-provoking thing here. If I'm thinking about the demand curve is the ability and willingness to pay. So you might be willing to pay a certain amount, but if you don't have the ability, right, all bets are off. If I have the willingness to go out and I don't know, buy a brand new Jeep, but I don't have the ability, right? In terms of like when I say Jeep, I want to get one of those Hellcats that are like $90,000. It's absurd. So I'm not going to do that, right? So it's ability and willingness. So if we're trying to get a good measure of how much demand there is for a specific team in different cities, population is a good measure. Like that's the number of buyers. But what's something else that might matter as well? Yeah, their income, right? It's really a combination, right? It's the ability to pay as well. So we want to look at population, but we also might want to look at something like we try to weight the population using like average income measures or something like that as well, right? And we'll think a little bit more about that once we get to the ticket market. So income changes, right? Anytime we have higher income, right, we see an increase in the demand curve as well, right? It's kind of a combination of these two things. Now, this is generally for a normal good. Most examples we'll be thinking about normal goods, which is that when people have more money, they purchase more of that product, right? So when we look at areas that have higher average incomes, we tend to see that there's either more tickets purchased or higher prices paid for those tickets, right? But we can see inferior goods. So if I think about inferior goods, this is where as people have, as people have more money, they actually buy less of the goods. So a non-sports example I always give is like, Keystone or like ramen noodles, like all these cheap products that you probably consume a lot of while you're in college. But then once you actually see that you have an actual income, you're going to buy less and less of those, right? So a good sport example of this might be what? So I was saying ticket prices for like NFL, Major League Baseball. We generally think of those as normal goods. People have more money. We see that they tend to pay higher prices or purchase more tickets. What's something in sports that could be an inferior good? Yeah. Parking. So if I have more money, would I be willing to pay more or less for parking? Parking is kind of a weird one because you really only can ever buy one, right? So a good example of inferior goods is we have Major League Baseball, but we also have AAA, AA, single A. So when we look at these lower levels, these amateur leagues, those tend to definitely, like we see, like it looks like they're inferior goods, right? So if you think about it, if they're a family with, you know, who doesn't have a lot of, maybe, you know, a single mom with 4 kids or something, it's going to be difficult, right? Unless she's got a really well-paying job to take her kids to an NFL game. But, right, it's a lot easier to go to like some of these amateur like football leagues that exist where like there's like no fans, right, except for like kids, right? But because they just want to watch the sport. So we typically would see like the lower levels of leagues; those tend to look like inferior goods. So we'll touch on that a little bit throughout the semester. So kind of these minor leagues, right? Where are we at? 15 minutes. We'll go over this and then we'll kind of probably wrap it up. So we've got substitute goods, and we'll talk about complement goods, which are demand shifters. So substitute goods are things that can be used in place of each other, right? So there's not as much of this in a lot of the examples that we'll look at because we have fan allegiance. But for a second, you know, assume that we don't have fan allegiance, and I live in the city of Chicago and I just want to go watch a baseball game. Like maybe I'm a Red Sox fan and I'm somehow in Chicago and I just want to go to one of the games, right? Right. I can either go to a White Sox game, buy a ticket there. I can go to the Cubs game, buy a ticket there, right? These are substitute goods. I only want to go to one game. I need to choose one of the two, right? So we do have examples of this. So if I'm thinking about making that choice, if the price of the Cubs ticket is much higher than the price of the White Sox ticket, if I don't care about either team, what would I choose? One with a lower price, right? So as the price of one of those tickets goes up, I'm less likely to buy that and more likely to buy the other good, right? So if the price of Cubs tickets is going up, we might tend to see that the more consumers substituting away, purchasing White Sox tickets. So there, an increase in the price of that substitute good actually increases the quantity of White Sox tickets sold, right? If the price of Cubs tickets is going up. So we kind of have this idea that the price of a substitute good goes up, the demand curve for whatever its substitute is increasing, right? In my example there, if the price of Cubs tickets is going up, the demand curve for White Sox tickets is increasing, okay? Any questions that make sense there? Kind of remembering some of this. So the other example I always give is Ohio State and Purdue football tickets. So one very interesting thing, I went to Purdue as that's not the interesting thing, but I went to Purdue as an undergraduate. The interesting thing is Ohio State tickets are pretty expensive. And whenever we played Ohio State, more than half of the stadium was Ohio State fans, it felt like. Like they would travel that far because the price was so much lower for our games. I remember going to games for like $10 or something like that. Like we were terrible. So they just wanted to see an Ohio State football game. They would literally, right, because the price was so low for the substitute good, which is just attending an Ohio State football game, if they don't care about being at, you know, the stadium, you saw a lot of their kind of fans travel. So that lower price actually attracted kind of more players, and Ohio State would have then seen kind of a decrease in the demand maybe for their games. Complementary goods. We don't have a lot of examples throughout the semester of this, but just to kind of make sure we're touching on it. And we could think of it like a project like that person did the WWE UFC thing. We might see some examples of it. So if, let's say, we use the White Sox Cubs the end, and when they play each other, yeah, if one of them is better, or well, it wouldn't work in the ticket market, but it might work if we're thinking about the demand just for attendance of, or maybe if we're thinking about like TV viewership, right? Because think about it this way: if we've got, let's use Boston, New York Yankees, right? If we see that, well, no, I think it's more of a quality complementary. It's not so much the demand curve, right? There's not a complement going on in terms of the demand for, well, because if you're thinking about rivals when they play each other, the product is actually just one product. There's not multiple markets, right? It's just that game. The prices go up when they play rivals, but when we're thinking about complementary goods, it would have to be that they're playing 2 games because we'd have to have 2 products. They're complements, not in the sense of that they're demand. We don't have 2 products to look for complements for, but there's kind of like we have a catch-all category. Where did I list it? Maybe I don't have it listed here. Like things that are in style. There's always going to be a catch-all category for things that like are specific to that example. So like what you're saying is quality, like I can think of a lot of examples where quality of these two rivals is complementary, right? That if they both have high quality, the games they play against each other will sell like crazy, right? But I don't know if I would say they're complementary, because if they're both high quality, if the Red Sox are really good, is that actually going to increase tickets to the Yankees games when they're not playing the Reds? Probably not, right? So it's a little bit different because they really only have one product, but you're thinking about the idea of complements the right way. The other thing we could think of maybe for complementary goods, like I always use beer and like hot dogs at a stadium, right? If I only want to eat a hot dog, if I can also drink beer with it, right? Then if the price of a hot beer goes up to like $20 a can, I may not buy the hot dog, right? Because it's like I have to pay for both of them if I truly view them as complementary goods, right? But it's not great examples, although in some stadiums, right, in some locations, parking and tickets become really good complementary goods, because like if there's literally only one place you can park, right, that's really kind of wrapped in then to the price of attending the game. So if the price of an NFL ticket was $50, I'm like, oh sweet, I'm gonna go to the game, but the price of parking is $100. Well, then the price of attending the game is actually $150, and I may not go, right? So the price of that complimentary good parking may kind of influence the demand that we see for the ticket sales to that game as well. I kind of have like a summary of all these demand shifters that are just very general. They're not specific to sports. I'll be completely honest, I just stole this from a textbook. I just think it's a good kind of summary slide to have all in one place. Next class, we'll talk about a few things that shift the supply curve. But I want to introduce one more idea, and then I'll let you guys get out of here, because we'll start to think about this next class. So I've been talking about ticket markets a lot. So generally we have, right, kind of supply and demand curve here, right? If I think about my ticket market, maybe I've got this demand curve, but my supply curve, what's the marginal cost? So let's say we've got a stadium. The stadium is built, and we'll even go a little bit even crazier. We don't need to do this, but I think it'll help with the thought experiment. Let's say the stadium is completely paid for. So they're not even paying off the stadium at all. Think about the marginal cost of each seat in that stadium, right? Each ticket that can be sold. What additional costs does it take to provide 2 of those seats as opposed to 1 of them? They're all going to be there either way, right? The seats are what they are, right? They're already built, they're already paid for, they're just sitting there. So if we decide to sell 1 ticket or we decide to sell 2 tickets, our marginal costs are actually the same, right? Now, you could argue there's some negligible marginal cost of like probably electricity or something like, but really I doubt that, because unless you like shut off parts of the stadium so that you could then shut off the electricity, you still have to have the lights on either way to play the game. So when it comes to tickets, the marginal cost is actually the same for every single quantity. So we think of our actual supply curve here. If every single quantity has no marginal cost, our supply curve runs along the x-axis, but then is halted at whatever the capacity of the stadium is, right? But my stadium only has 10,000 seats, I can't sell 11,000 tickets, right? Without getting in some probably serious trouble with the fire department or something like that. Okay? So when we think about the ticket market, we actually have this really unique example where marginal costs aren't increasing, they're actually constant. And they're constant at 0. So we go kind of a supply curve that runs all the way out to the capacity, and then it's a vertical line. I can't sell anything past that point. Okay? So we'll start to use that a little bit more next class. I'll be posting that online quiz just to gather a little bit more information about you guys. If you start to have ideas throughout the week and you want to stop by and pick around some ideas for your project, feel free to do that. Otherwise, we'll see you guys on, one thing I'll mention, I completely forgot when I was talking earlier. So I record these lectures. We have a YouTube page, right? So I'll post an announcement that has the link to this first recorded lecture. And then from here on out, you can always just go to that playlist to look for the next recorded lecture. Okay. All right. I'll see you guys on Thursday.